In the mid-17th century, France dominated continental Europe under the glorious reign of the Sun King. However, beneath this era of prosperity, a scandal shocked the nation, the affair of the poisons. This case was one of the largest criminal investigations of France's Ancien Régime, leading to the arrest of 319 suspects, with 194 convicted and 36 executed, most of them women. The scandal began with a murder triggered by a husband's attempt to seize his wife's dowry. In the following sections, we will delve into this historical event and uncover the truth behind this real-life version of why women kill. In 1672, a cavalry officer named Gaudin de Sainte-Croix passed away. Due to his overwhelming debts, his possessions were sorted and auctioned off. Among his belongings, a box containing numerous letters exchanged between him and his mistress, Marie-Madeleine d'Aubray, was discovered. The contents of these letters were shocking. Marie-Madeleine admitted to poisoning her father and two brothers in a bid to secure her inheritance. This revelation quickly caught the attention of the police, and Marie-Madeleine was immediately arrested. What initially appeared to be an isolated case of murder for financial gain soon revealed itself to be the first domino in a far more extensive and sinister series of events. Marie-Madeleine d'Aubray was born into a wealthy family. At the age of 17, she married the Marquis de Brinvilliers in a loveless arranged marriage. As the eldest daughter of her family, Marie-Madeleine brought with her a substantial dowry of 160,000 livres. The Marquis married her mainly for the dowry, and although the couple lacked deep affection, the Marquis was relatively open-minded. They led largely independent lives, maintaining a facade of harmony. However, when Marie-Madeleine discovered that the Marquis had started to squander her dowry due to his gambling addiction, the situation changed. To protect her dowry, Marie-Madeleine decided to take her husband to court, requesting that the court separate the management of her dowry from the family's assets. According to the customary laws of the time, although the husband had the right to use family wealth, a wife could sue to protect her dowry, which was her premarital property, if her husband was recklessly spending it. The Marquis was furious that Marie-Madeleine had taken him to court, but what angered her even more was that her father and brothers not only refused to support her, but also rebuked her for lacking proper womanly virtues and shame. They even warned her that if the Marquis decided to exercise his legal rights as her husband, they would not intervene, and advised her to behave submissively. What they implied was that if Marie-Madeleine provoked the Marquis, he could send her to a convent, and her family would not object. To her male relatives, Marie-Madeleine's fight for her legal rights was nothing more than a challenge to patriarchy and a disgrace to the family. Moreover, despite knowing about the Marquis's debauchery, her father could not tolerate Marie-Madeleine's relationship with her lover, Gaudin de Sainte-Croix. In his eyes, it was normal for men to have mistresses, but for a woman to engage with a lover was morally corrupt. After multiple failed attempts to have the Marquis reign in his wife, Marie-Madeleine's father finally appealed to the king, resulting in Sainte-Croix being imprisoned in the Bastille. Having lost the emotional support of her lover and facing immense pressure from all her male relatives, Marie-Madeleine ultimately lost the lawsuit in this unequal battle. Completely disheartened, her resentment festered and grew. The more she thought about it, the more she couldn't let go of her anger. Her hatred for the men who stood in her way continued to build, and soon a dark plot began to form in her mind. Marie-Madeleine decided to eliminate the men who obstructed her through slow poisoning, including her husband, father, and two brothers. Sainte-Croix, with his background as an alchemist and knowledge of medicine, had made valuable connections while imprisoned in the Bastille. There, he met an Italian poison expert named Exili, who had previously been employed by Queen Christina of Sweden and was now imprisoned in France for his involvement in a poisoning case. Sainte-Croix learned the art of poison-making from Exili, and after his release, he quickly rose to fame as an alchemist and scholar. However, his relationship with Marie-Madeleine continued. At her direction, and with her financial support, Sainte Croix established an underground laboratory to produce slow-acting poisons. With Sainte Croix's expertise and Marie Madeleine's connections in the noble circles, the couple began helping wealthy individuals who wished to expedite their inheritance. Of course, Marie Madeleine's main targets were still her closest male relatives, her husband, father, and 2 brothers. Her goal was clear: to eliminate the men who stood in her way and controlled her freedom and life. Marie Madeleine first tested the poison on unsuspecting poor patients at Paris's public hospital. Since the early deaths of these patients wouldn't raise suspicion, her experiments went unnoticed. She may have even tested the poison on her own servants. By 1666, when her father suddenly fell ill, Marie Madeleine saw a perfect opportunity. The legal disputes from years earlier seemed to have faded away, and her father mistakenly believed they had reconciled. Without hesitation, he invited her to care for him. After administering more than 20 doses of poison, Marie Madeleine's father finally succumbed to the poison. Not long after, her 2 brothers were also poisoned, both dying in 1670. Her final target was her husband, the Marquis de Brinvilliers. Although the Marquis had been poisoned, he ultimately survived. The reason was that his relationship with Sainte Croix, his wife's lover, had remained fairly cordial. After Marie Madeleine had killed 3 people, Sainte Croix began to feel guilty and secretly administered an antidote to the Marquis 5 times. This caused the Marquis's condition to fluctuate, but in the end, he managed to recover. When the plot was eventually uncovered, Marie Madeleine fled to England and later sought refuge in Switzerland and other countries. Although many fugitives who had committed capital crimes escaped abroad from France each year and were rarely pursued with urgency, Marie Madeleine's case was different. Not only had she murdered her father and brothers, but she had also cut off her family's paternal bloodline, an unforgivable crime. As a result, the French authorities spared no effort in using diplomatic means to extradite her back to France for trial. In 1676, under severe torture, Marie Madeleine confessed to her crimes. She was sentenced to a public beheading, and her body was immediately burned at the stake. The case should have ended there. However, what troubled Nicolas de la Reynie, the chief of the Paris police who oversaw the case, was something Marie Madeleine had said before her execution. "Do you think I'm the only one? You're naive. Let me tell you, half the population of Paris are poisoners. I'm just the beginning." When La Reynie asked her to reveal other poison dealers, she remained tight-lipped, only admitting to using common arsenic and sulfuric acid. This issue became a lingering shadow for Chief La Reynie, as his years of investigative experience made him suspect that the matter was far more complex than it appeared. At the end of 1677, a Parisian woman named Magdalene de Lagrange was arrested and accused of poisoning her lover. Her methods were strikingly similar to those in the Marie Madeleine case, involving poison once again. To reduce her sentence, de Lagrange told prosecutors that she had knowledge of an underground poison ring in Paris, an organization that had been supplying poisons for years, with its clientele including several high-ranking and influential individuals. La Reynie immediately realized the gravity of the situation. He reported this information to King Louis XIV, who was deeply alarmed. The king quickly ordered the formation of a special task force, with La Reynie as its leader. He was given unlimited resources, with a mandate to uncover the truth at all costs. Nicolas de la Reynie, the first chief of the Paris police and known for his swift and decisive actions, is often regarded as the founder of the modern police system. Under his command, Paris launched a massive citywide manhunt targeting poison sellers, alchemists, witches, and fortune tellers. A special tribunal, known as the Burning Court, was established to try suspects connected to the poisonings. The manhunt and trials continued for more than a year. In 1679, the infamous Parisian underground witch La Voisin was captured. La Voisin, whose real name was Catherine Monvoisin, had long made a living in Paris by selling love potions, performing abortions, and fortune-telling. Later, her activities escalated to organizing sinister black masses. She kept a client list that included the names of some of the highest-ranking members of French nobility. Among them were Olympe Mancini, Countess of Soissons, Marie-Anne Mancini, Duchess of Bouillon, and the Marshal of France, the Duke of Luxembourg. But these were not the most prominent names. During the interrogation of Lavoisin's daughter, she claimed that the king's official mistress, Madame de Montespan, had been purchasing love potions from her mother for years. Not only that, but Madame de Montespan had also participated in satanic rituals, lying naked on the altar during black masses, all in an effort to maintain the king's love. Lavoisin's daughter went on to accuse Madame de Montespan of attempting to poison Mademoiselle de Fontanges, her rival for the king's affection, and even plotting to poison the king himself. These accusations were serious enough to ruin Montespan and possibly implicate her entire family. Given the gravity of the situation, Lorraine carefully compiled the testimony and reported it word for word to King Louis XIV. One can only imagine Louis XIV's reaction when he learned that his companion of over 10 years had been involved in such a scandal, especially when he recalled how he often felt dizzy and unwell in her chambers, possibly the result of ingesting those love powders made from all sorts of dubious ingredients. Around 1670, France was enjoying a period of great success. The country was winning victory after victory on the battlefield. Its economy was booming, and its culture and arts had reached a peak. It was a time of prosperity. However, during this period, a shocking wave of mass poisonings erupted under Louis XIV's rule. For the king, this was like a cold shock, as if he had been publicly slapped in the face. In the midst of the poison scandal, Lorraine reminded Louis XIV that the accusations against Madame de Montespan were based primarily on the testimony of Lavoisin's daughter, lacking any solid evidence. It was possible that these claims were merely a defense strategy to escape her own punishment. This serves as a reminder that we must carefully consider the truth of such allegations. First, if Madame de Montespan wanted to poison Mademoiselle de Fontanges or even Louis XIV, she had countless opportunities to do so herself. Why would she go out of her way to involve outsiders when the fewer people who knew about it, the better? Second, according to modern medical views, Mademoiselle de Fontanges' postpartum hemorrhage was likely caused by fragments of the placenta remaining in the uterus, which matches the records from her autopsy. In that era, the mortality rate for women during childbirth was very high. Third, Mademoiselle de Fontanges was not Madame de Montespan's greatest rival. Let's not forget that Madame de Maintenon was her biggest threat. If poisoning were her goal, Madame de Maintenon should have been the primary target, not Mademoiselle de Fontanges. Despite working for Madame de Montespan for a long time, Madame de Maintenon remained in good health. In conclusion, while it's possible that Madame de Montespan may have purchased love potions or aphrodisiacs, the likelihood that she intentionally committed murder by poisoning is extremely low. For the former, Louis XIV ultimately chose to forgive her. Perhaps, as the Count of Saint-Maurice once wrote in a letter, the ladies of the court would offer their souls to the devil for the king's love. In 1682, after 194 people were convicted and 36 were executed, Louis XIV decided to halt the investigation into the affair of the poisons. He ordered Lorraine to hand over all the files to the royal court, where they were sealed away. On July 13, 1709, based on a decision by the King's Cabinet, 29 large boxes of old records, including those from this scandal, were destroyed. Lavoisin was executed by burning for her use of witchcraft and poison. Several high-ranking nobles were implicated. The Duke of Luxembourg was briefly imprisoned in the Bastille, the Countess of Soissons fled, and her sister, the Duchess of Bouillon, was acquitted with her husband's guarantee. Madame de Montespan received no substantial punishment. The only change was that Louis XIV no longer shared her bed, though he continued to visit her daily but never stayed the night. This marked the beginning of Montespan's decline in power. As Marie-Madeleine once said, she was not the only one involved in such acts. One by one, the poisoners were arrested, most of them women. Their goal was singular: to free themselves from the control of their husbands, fathers, or brothers. They wanted to take control of their own destinies. However, as long as the influence of their male relatives persisted, these women could never truly achieve the freedom they longed for. On the surface, these women seemed ruthless, but deeper reflection reveals that even in a time of apparent prosperity, the dark side of society and the struggles of women still existed. It was a poignant tragedy beneath the splendor.